Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete. The results show when the athletes hit the field. Joining us now from Dave Campbell's Texas Football and TexasFootball.com, the managing editor, Travis Stewart. How you doing, Travis?
I'm wonderful. How are you, bud?
Doing well. What are you guys doing now that the season's over? And I know that you're a few weeks away from National Signing Day. What's happening at Texas football?
Well, we've been busy as of late. We just put our winter magazine to bed. We released the cover yesterday. The magazine won't be out until, I think, about January 23rd at stores near you. But we released the cover yesterday, Johnny Manziel on the front. Not a surprise.
Shock. I'm shocked.
Yeah, I know, right? You and everybody else. But a great-looking cover, a full action shot, which is not something we've done a lot of in past years. But he was a player that just, we could have sat down and done a studio shot with him, but just the full action of him running in stride made more sense for his career to date. We needed action from him because that's what he's been, such a dynamic player. And so that'll be out in the stores at the end of January, but we're also going to put it in our digital app. You can get that through iTunes and Droid phones and Kindle Fire and all that. You'll be able to purchase the magazine through your app, and we're also going to put out, in conjunction with Signing Day, which you just mentioned, we're going to put out a special digital-only recruiting book. It'll be about 40 pages long within the app. So
wow.
If you like recruiting stuff, that'll be good for people like that, if you just have to go into the app to get it.
Okay. I do want to ask you about the meeting that the A&M athletic director had with Johnny Manziel's parents here just a few days ago, basically telling him, okay, the kid's a Heisman Trophy winner. He's a rock star now. Time to grow up. What do you think about that?
I think that's the right call. And I think no matter who the kid is, you probably have to sit down and have that talk, because even the most poised and savviest kids probably aren't going to be ready for the media crush after you win a Heisman. It's probably the most famous individual award in American sporting, and that includes the professional ranks. It's a big deal to win a Heisman Trophy, and everybody in the country is going to want a piece of that. And so he's going to be inundated with people looking for just a picture, or looking for an interview, or looking to pitch his family on an investment idea. I mean, you know how it all goes.
Sure.
It's an unbelievable crush of stuff from all different angles. And for a kid that's lively, and obviously some of the things he's done in the offseason and then again after the Cotton Bowl have come in to the forefront, and to a certain extent rightfully so, especially the event in the offseason, but because kids have to learn lessons and such. But it was the right time to do it and the right thing to do it, and I think that's the right talk to have with any kid once he steps into that kind of position.
And you're dealing with uncharted territory here with a freshman having won that trophy, so it makes it even more so an interesting conversation that you have to have.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this. I started thinking about this the other day. There's only been one other Heisman winner in the state of Texas who ever played another college season after winning his Heisman, and that was Doak Walker in the 40s.
Wow.
So it's a much different world, obviously, than when Doak did it. But also, when you say uncharted waters, yeah, for a freshman for sure, but also this just doesn't happen all that often. I mean, maybe it's probably happened in some other states, but out here in Texas it hasn't happened very often for a guy to come back after winning the Heisman. And the on-field expectations are one thing, but in our magazine that's coming out at the end of January, there's a funny quote from Johnny in there in the main feature, which is written by Brent Zwerneman, the primary Aggie beat writer for the Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News. Brent asked Johnny, well, where are you going to keep the Heisman? He said, well, probably at my parents' house, because I live on campus right next to the stadium. I mean, everyone's going to be coming by trying to play hide the Heisman in the backyard. Those are the little elements and little things we forget that kids have to go through as kids. And when you put that one of the most now public faces in American sports right there, that's a lot of moving pieces for one kid.
Man, it's been a whirlwind life for him here this past year. It's amazing. It's just going to be interesting to see how he follows up this first year.
Well, I think that, like we said, the expectations are going to be very high. But at the same time, Kevin Sumlin's pretty good at managing expectations. Obviously, he was at Oklahoma, and then Case Keenum, it's not quite the same thing, but Case Keenum had a lot of people crawling around him too, heading into his senior year. And I think Kevin Sumlin will handle this the right way and say, Johnny obviously is what he is. He's a heck of a player. We're very lucky to have him. He has a chance to win another Heisman, but there's 21 other guys, starting on this team, and they're all very important. And I think that Coach Sumlin's going to make efforts this offseason to balance out maybe some of the media crush amongst that whole team to keep this group balanced after this crazy year.
Okay, the NCAA convention is going to be going on up at Grapevine starting today and through, I think, the weekend. And there are several proposals on the table that would affect the recruitment of high school athletes. And I wanted to get your take on them, how you feel about them. One of these proposals, a real high-profile proposal, would allow unlimited phone calls, texts, and private electronic communication from coaches and school officials. Is this a good idea?
No, not really. And the NCAA's approach, or a better way to say it, their line of thinking with that ruling is they're trying to simplify the rule book for coaches and recruiting. And my heart goes out to coaches because the amount of rules out there it's ludicrous how many they are. They tend to overlap. They contradict each other. It's an almost impossible landscape to navigate without stepping on a violation of recruiting rules now because it's just the book is so complex. That said, the total and complete deregulation of the field is not the answer. And I feel bad saying what I'm about to say. I don't know what the correct answer is.
Right.
I'd have to sit down and really look at that, but I have a pretty good feeling that this isn't it. And I'm not sure that I'm sure the NCAA has been getting a lot of pressure from coaches over the years to try and make their lives a little easier in this regard and get schools off of probation for things that they didn't even really know were wrong when they were doing them. But this is really outsourcing and shifting their responsibility and the burden to a lot of kids who are going to be just under constant siege. I mean, it's going to be, for some of the top-name recruits, it's going to be ridiculous. It's already a lot of pressure for the big-name recruit kids. They're always going to find ways to get in touch with these guys. But now, if this thing passes, these poor kids are going to be buried under a flood of stuff from coaches. It'll be intense.
I can't imagine this thing passing. I mean, I can't imagine anybody with any common sense at all saying this is a good idea.
I kind of fall into the same boat. It's hard for me to imagine this will pass if people are really sitting there thinking about what a kid's life will be like, if this goes through. I guess the best way to approach it would be if it's totally deregulated, and who knows, maybe they'll create some time guidelines or something, but if it's totally deregulated, how can anybody look at a college coaching staff and call them student athletes for kids with a straight face? Because the recruitment and the constant text messages and emails and phone calls will totally overwhelm any chance the kid's going to have an education as a senior year. I mean, and if you think otherwise, you're kidding yourself. If you're one of the top defensive tackles or top corners in the country, it'll be nonstop. And how is a kid supposed to do homework when his cell phone's blown up? They'll just have to get rid of his cell phone. Have to close his email address, for heaven's sake.
Which may
You
happen.
can't tell me. Yeah, you're right. You can't tell me that education is as important as athletics if these kids are just going to be constantly buried to a detrimental point under all this.
Okay, then there's also the proposal that would allow the coaches to start meeting with a recruit off campus in his junior and senior years of high school instead of only the senior year.
Yeah, I don't have as strong an opinion on this one. There probably are pros and cons both ways. But at the same time, I'm not savvy enough on what those relationships look like. And unfortunately, the negative truth of recruiting is, and it's not like this is a new phenomenon. It's been this way for years, back when coaches were hiding in bushes with binoculars during the Southwest Conference days. It's always been this way. Recruiting is a shady business. And every coach or every coaching staff, for the most part, is going to find some way to toe the line or to bend the rules a little bit. And that regulation or deregulation, to my just surface analysis, sounds like it would have a relatively minimal impact, at least in comparison to deregulating texts and phone calls. But I'm sure someone will be able to find a way to spin that into an unfair advantage. Another policy they had talked about was allowing unlimited amounts of coaches to be out at one time. Mm-hmm. That one seems like, okay, well, that's no big deal, right? But I guess at that extent, unless there's an NCAA rule I'm missing, I mean, what's not to prevent the really big-name schools with incredible funding, like Texas, for example, or Oklahoma, for example, from hiring 60, 70 assistant coaches and just flooding the state with them at all times?
Boy, you have a devious mind. I never thought of that.
Well, I don't even, again, there may be some NCAA regulation on how many coaches you can have on a staff at all. I don't think there is. And if that's the case, I mean, God only knows what you could do with that many people out floating around. You could have one per every major high school if you wanted to. So that's a sticky issue as well. But visits in junior and senior year, that was one that didn't immediately raise a red flag with me.
The one I'm not quite sure I even understand it is allowing schools to treat prospects like student athletes once a national letter of intent or signed offer of admission or financial aid is received. Do you even have a clue what that means?
You know, I'm a little fuzzy on the terms, but I have a pretty good guess. And that if a kid signs a letter of intent on this year it's February 6th. If he signs a letter of intent on February 6th, but he's not graduating until May, the school can't tell him what to do, more or less. You know, he could still go out and play basketball, I guess, or he could play baseball, I guess. The way I'm interpreting, or at least part of what this could mean, would be if the school can treat a guy as their student athlete, well, once he signs that letter of intent, they may be able to tell him, you can't play baseball, or you can't play this all-star game, the Texas High School Coaches Association all-star game in June. They essentially get, I guess, jurisdiction over what that kid decides to do in some of his athletic pursuits. I don't know if that's it for sure, but I have a pretty good idea that would be part of it, and I definitely don't like that idea. I think that's absolutely the wrong message, but I have a feeling that one may end up passing and that the folks like me are going to lose that battle.
Well, and the question that comes to my mind is, okay, does that mean then that, say, a kid commits to Texas Tech, for instance, and a booster there in his hometown decides he's going to give him unlimited free meals now for the rest of his senior year of high school? I guess he's violating NCAA rules now?
That would, if they're treating him like a student athlete by the letter of that law, then yes, that would seem to be the case.
I don't know if that's happening now, but you know, I'm trying to think of scenarios, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, if we're trying to simplify rules, that sounds like that's opening another door into a fun house of mirrors of, distorted opinions and such. That seems like another issue, but the NCAA has rarely acted swiftly, uniformly, and efficiently. So I can't imagine that this will break that mold.
And you left out sanely.
Yeah, well, that's been a big issue too. And really, this whole recruiting aspect. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. This has always stressed me out to a significant degree. Dave Campbell's Texas Football, we cover recruiting to a certain extent, meaning that we rank kids at the beginning of the season, and that's the only rankings we provide. We track commits based on what newspaper outlets and what kids tell us, but we don't go actively seeking what kids have done in the commit world. We just try and stay out of that because we view ourselves as a little more of a high school brand. And as recruiting continues to grow, and I don't know if importance is the right word, but in impact and visibility, I think these rules are going to become more and more. They become more and more visible, and it becomes more and more of a big deal every year, which honestly just kind of gives me tired head a little bit.
It gives me a headache.
Yeah.
All right, and then there's the rule about deregulating camps and clinics, employment rules related to both recruits and current student athletes. Said senior football prospects would be allowed to participate in camps and clinics. What's your thought on that?
Again, this is not one that raised immediate red flags, at least not like some of the other ones we've already discussed. And again, I'm not super savvy enough with what those circuits look like in the off season, what they look like during the season. For all I know, what that does mean, however, is typically a lot of recruits get their offers, and a lot of them pledge on junior days.
Right.
And I don't know what this does to the importance of junior days. It may reduce it. It may heighten it. I'm not sure, really. And really, the only people who can tell you that are probably going to be college coaches, because they're the only ones who are really going to know, okay, well, with that regulation, now that opens up the door for us to do this or to push this timeline to here or whatever. Those are the guys who are going to know the answers to those the most. Folks like me, a lot of times on some of these, we spend some of that just guessing.
Okay. Back to the colleges just for a few minutes. A lot of teams hiring coaches now, assistant coaches and so forth. Any of those stand out to you as being significant? I know Houston hired offensive and defensive coordinators. Tech hired a defensive coordinator.
Well, Texas Tech is the one that's interested me the most. UTEP's brought in their new head coach, Kugler, who is a former player there, and I'm really hoping can give the Miners an identity. I think that's a key hire at a key point in time for them. But Texas Tech is really the one that I'm having a hard time looking away from right now. They obviously went with Kingsbury, who is a young, energetic, charismatic, almost Kevin Sumlin-like leader for that program. He brings a very distinct identity to that head coaching role. But he's also brought in a lot of young names alongside him, too, specifically the one he just pulled away really no more than about 48, 72 hours ago was Cibolo Steele's head coach Mike Jinks, who's been very successful at Cibolo Steele in 5A, who is now going to be the running backs coach at Tech. And running backs coach sounds like a relatively minor job when we talk about head coaches, DCs, and OCs, which are always the ones we talk about the most. But first of all, there's no way Jinks is going to stay in that role for very long. He's going to continue to rise up the coaching ladder because he's too gifted. So expect to see him in a bigger and better role before too terribly much longer. But also, it's indicative of what Kingsbury seems to be doing, which is building a staff that has a lot of people like him. Younger guys, really high-energy guys who can relate to kids really well. If A&M is obviously the powerhouse school in the block right now, and with the recruiting class they're building for 2013, I think that's pretty apparent what kids think about that. If A&M is the powerhouse school in the block right now, then Texas Tech is rapidly becoming the young, savvy coaching staff that kids are really going to have to look at and think twice about if they want to turn down an offer from them to go somewhere else, because those guys, when they step in your room, they're just, this is going to sound ridiculous and old and cauchery from me, but those guys are going to be cool.
Oh, yeah.
Step in the room. It's like, oh, those guys are awesome. I really enjoy talking to them. I relate to those guys. It's an interesting strategy, and I think it's got a lot of prospects for success.
Okay, and then I'm going to throw one out at you. I'm not sure how much you've kept up with it, but Dickie Meeks is leaving Henderson after winning a state championship there 2 years ago and going a long ways in the playoffs this past year. Looks like he's going to be headed to Pittsburgh. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I thought that was a little interesting. I don't know Dickie Meeks' history all that well. I mean, obviously I know he won one at Chapel Hill and he's won one at Henderson. I don't know what his ties are to Pittsburgh, if any, but typically, let me take a step back. Pittsburgh won a state title, 20 years ago?
1980. I covered that team.
Okay, so about 20, or so I guess that's 30 years ago now. Yeah. About 32 years ago. So normally,
thanks for reminding me of that, too, by the way.
Sorry, Bryan. So, Pittsburgh's a pretty good open job. And a lot of times if a school has won a state title before, a lot of big-name coaches look at those gigs because they know that the talent has been there at some point. It probably still is at some level. But for a coach to leave an immediate current contender like Henderson for that, I thought was an interesting shift. And, I mean, I was out at the Henderson Van game in the playoffs this year, had a chance to talk to Coach Meeks. He seemed happy. I mean, he seemed like everything was going well at Henderson. He seemed to be enjoying it. The team was playing well. They had another deep playoff run this year. Pittsburgh's a great job. I was just surprised to see Meeks leave another great job for it.
I was too, but he has moved around some, and he likes to build, and so this would definitely be a building job because they were 2-8 this past year. So interesting move by a guy that's won state championships. It's just I just thought it was he won't talk to us yet until it's official. So we're going to try to talk to him Friday, and when it's all approved. But we're going to talk to him and try to find out what his thinking is on that. But Travis, okay, once again, now tell us when everything is ready. One more time.
Okay, I almost need a cheat sheet for this at this point. So I think the magazine is going to be on racks and stores all across the state on January 23rd. That's the preliminary date we were given by the printer today. That's the winter edition magazine with Johnny Manziel on the cover. A few days after that is on the racks. That'll be available for purchase within our app on iPhones, Droid devices, Kindle Fire. So you can probably expect to see that around January 25th, 26th or so. Then after signing day, which is the 6th, so we'll probably be looking at around maybe the 11th or 12th of February, we'll have a special recruiting-only magazine in the app for purchase for people who are big into recruiting. It'll have some video, slideshows, a whole bunch of interactive elements that are a lot of fun in this digital magazine era, and we think people are really going to enjoy that. Very good. Hey, it's great talking to you. We're glad to have you back on the show this week, and look forward to talking to you next week. I will be here, bud. We'll see you then. All right, good deal. Travis Stewart for Dave Campbell's Texas Football and TexasFootball.com on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.